You already know more than you think. You just don't know how to read the patterns yet. Because every human being leaves a trail of psychological data, and these 15 cold laws of dark psychology will teach you how to decode them. This is the hidden script no one talks about, because once you see it, you become a threat to the illusions people build around themselves. But let's be entirely honest with each other before we begin. If you learn to see people this clearly, it will not make your life easier. It will make it lonelier. The more aware you are, the harder it is to connect, because you will realize that most people do not want to be understood. They want to be believed. They wear masks because they desperately need them. And when you see through the act, they will run. They don't want the truth. They want comfort. They want to be admired, not exposed. So, the real curse of this knowledge isn't just the power it gives you. It's watching the world choose beautiful lies over uncomfortable truths every single day. This video is divided into 3 distinct psychological levels, each building on the last. If you skip a section or skim the surface, you will lose the dark mechanics that make this system work. So stay locked in, because by the end, you won't just decode the people around you. You will look into your own reflection and see the architecture of your own defenses. From a moment you enter society, you are conditioned to listen to words. We treat speech as currency, but dark psychology warns us that language is the ultimate tool of deception. People rarely speak to reveal truth. They speak for survival, for ego preservation, and out of hidden fear. The surface personality is never the actual person. It is simply the armor they constructed to navigate the world. The individual who acts excessively kind is often not kind at all. They're running a compliance script because they are terrified of rejection. The person who projects absolute dominance is usually crumbling internally, praying that no one looks closely enough to notice the structural flaws. And what makes human behavior so deceptive is that they are completely blind to their own performance. Most people are actors living out a script they didn't write. Their reactions, their moral outrages, their tones of voice, all are engineered by what kept them secure in the past. They aren't deliberately lying to you. They are hiding from themselves. As a clinical rule, the more profound the vulnerability, the heavier the mask. But human nature leaks data constantly, not through spoken sentences, but through the micro failures of the persona, the sudden tension in the jaw, the way they laugh a second too long to fill an empty room, or how rapidly they redirect the conversation when an inquiry gets too close to home. Law 1. The mask always leaks under structural tension. Every individual wears a calculated persona to survive social spaces, not because they are inherently malicious, but because they are terrified of being exposed. To survive the social matrix, they engineer a version of themselves that guarantees acceptance. But human design is imperfect, and every mask eventually slips under tension. When you want to analyze someone, don't watch their normal baseline behavior. Watch for the precise moment their beliefs are challenged or their authority is questioned. That flash of physical discomfort, that subtle shift in posture or tone, is where the performance fails and where the actual psychological profile begins. Law 2. What they attack in public is what they conceal in private. This is the law of psychological projection, and it is one of the sharpest analytical tools you can possess. When someone spends an excessive amount of energy mocking or criticizing a specific trait in others, they're giving you a direct map of their own hidden insecurities. When an individual constantly targets arrogance in their peers, they are almost always fighting a desperate internal war with their own fragile self-worth. When someone is obsessively pointing out dishonesty around them, they're usually shielding a massive deception they haven't faced themselves. We naturally despise in the external world what we are terrified to acknowledge within our own boundaries. So, if you want to read someone's hidden liabilities, don't look at what they praise. Look exclusively at what they aggressively criticize and why. Law 3. Strategic silence is deeper than speech. The masses believe that communication happens through talking, but speech is frequently used as a shield to prevent genuine psychological contact. When an individual pauses deliberately before answering an unexpected question, when they skillfully bypass specific keywords, or when they offer highly polished, rehearsed micro-answers to deeply emotional prompts. That silence is the loudest data point in the room. An individual who is actively avoiding vulnerability will fill the space with words, but their refusal to settle into the quiet reveals exactly what they are protecting. The silence tells you exactly where the boundary line is drawn. Law 4. Weaponized virtue is disguised manipulation. You must learn to be highly suspicious of the individual who loudly advertises their moral purity. The person who is always policing the room, always correcting the behavior of others, and always displaying their empathy on a public stage. In dark psychology, this is recognized as the will to dominate, disguised as morality. Absolute virtue is often used as a strategic cover for psychological superiority. The louder someone signals their goodness, the more likely they're using that purity to hide an immense underlying malice or an insatiable need for control. Authentic strength and alignment never require an audience or applause. Law 5. Individuals lie to themselves long before they deceive you. This insight shifts your entire vantage point when analyzing human interactions. The frequent deceptions you encounter, the phrases like, "I am completely over it," or "it doesn't affect me at all," are not calculated fabrications designed to harm you. They are highly rehearsed internal coping mechanisms that the individual has repeated so many times they actually believe them. Self-deception is an automated defense system designed to protect a fractured psyche from a reality it cannot handle. So, when a person's narrative contains obvious logical contradictions, do not waste your time feeling insulted or assuming they're trying to play you. Realize they have been playing themselves far longer. And those structural inconsistencies are the exact entry points you use to read their true motives. Once you transition from simply observing the mask to recognizing why the mask was built, you enter the second level of psychological analysis. Here, we look directly at the points where the human ego begins to overcompensate. Because the human personality is not a fixed, unshakable tower. It is a fragile assembly of defense mechanisms designed to survive chaos. In the exact moment that structure feels threatened, the truth completely floods out. Most human action is fueled by subterranean anxieties that the individual refuses to name. If you enter a room and see someone over-explaining a simple mistake, dominating a casual conversation with aggressive volume, or completely withdrawing into total emotional detachment, you are not witnessing their personality. You are witnessing their fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of loss of status, fear of humiliation, or fear of absolute invalidation. Human beings rarely operate from pure, unadulterated intent. They operate from a profound terror of losing control over how they are perceived. So, when your objective is to analyze an individual's internal blueprint, you must stop paying attention to what they claim they want. Instead, look at the board and ask one clinical question. What are they terrified of losing right now? That question is your flashlight in the dark. Next time you observe someone delivering an endless stream of criticism, listen to the speaker instead of the target. The person who ridicules emotional depth in others is usually terrified of the chaotic waters within themselves. The individual who constantly belittles the external presentation of those around them is locked in a silent, devastating conflict with their own mirror. Judgment is almost never an objective assessment of the target. It is a confession of the judge's internal trauma. Projection is an automated psychological leak, and if you know how to process the signal, it tells you exactly where the subject's unhealed pain is stored. Law 6. Grandiose superiority compensates for invisible inferiority. Absolute confidence is quiet, but structural insecurity is incredibly loud. If an individual feels an uncontrollable need to remind you of their status, their execution, or their historical achievements, they are running an overcompensation loop because they're terrified that without those titles, they are utterly irrelevant. When someone casually minimizes the success of others to elevate themselves, they are operating from a deep-seated fear of being completely overlooked. Real internal stability has no structural requirement to compete, to dominate, or to validate its own existence. So, when someone tries to rule the room, look right through the throne. Behind the crown, you will almost always locate a deeply threatened ego trying to prevent its own collapse. Law 7. False confidence architecture hides chronic guilt. There is a highly specific archetype you will encounter frequently. The individual who displays flawless composure, an unyielding certainty, and an absolute refusal to admit error under any circumstances. But if you run a continuous analysis on them, you will notice the subtle physical strain, the rigid set of the shoulders, the absolute hypervigilance under pressure, and the intense defensiveness when their authority is subtly questioned. This performance of absolute certainty is a psychological shield built to bury an immense amount of internal guilt or self-regret. They perform perfection because they cannot survive the weight of their own past mistakes. When someone's confidence feels completely unnatural, do not be intimidated by the presentation. Look for the hidden ledger they're trying to run from. Law 8. Human insecurity betrays itself through absolute exaggeration. This law is incredibly quiet, but once you train your eye to see it, it becomes impossible to ignore. Human beings consistently overemphasize what they lack. The individual who constantly states, "I don't care what anyone thinks of me," is someone whose entire nervous system is ruled by public opinion. The person who insists their life is absolute bliss is almost always drowning in unaddressed despair. Exaggeration is an automated alarm system of the ego trying to drown out its own internal doubt. When an individual's statements cross into absolute extremes, do not evaluate the words they are using. Evaluate the intensity of the insecurity they are trying to mute. Volume is used when the truth is terrifying. Law 9. The obsession with external control signals internal chaos. The drive to manage external environments is directly proportional to the degree of internal disorder. If you observe an individual who must micromanage every minute detail of their surroundings, who reacts with extreme hostility to minor changes in routine, or who demands absolute obedience from the people in their orbit, do not mistake this for natural leadership. It is a desperate survival tactic. When an individual's internal world is completely fractured and chaotic, they must force the external world into rigid submission to keep from losing their mind entirely. They dominate others because they are terrified that the moment they loosen their grip, their entire psychological reality will shatter. The more oppressive the outer shell, the more fragile the internal landscape. Law 10. The louder the social performance, the emptier the psychological core. We live in a culture designed around curated identities, endless self-promotion, and hyper-visible lifestyles. But dark psychology dictates that constant performance is a symptom of extreme internal scarcity. When an individual is perpetually staging their life for an audience, creating nonstop noise, drama, and aesthetic perfection, it is because they don't believe they possess any intrinsic value without an external gaze. They require the crowd to validate their existence because their internal reservoir is completely dry. The person who truly possesses self-awareness and internal alignment doesn't need to be watched. They're already structurally sound. But the performer is trapped in a permanent loop of screaming for attention, disguised as influence. By this stage of the analysis, your perception should be completely altered. You don't just see social interactions anymore. You see the hidden machinery running behind them. You walk into a space, and the behavioral patterns speak infinitely louder than any spoken dialogue. You see the bully and immediately spot the wounded child. You see the hyperachiever and register the unloved youth who thinks validation must be earned through sweat and blood. You're no longer a victim of surface appearances. You're actively decoding the human architecture. But this brings us to the deepest and most dangerous level of dark psychology, because behind every automated behavior is an unhealed fracture, and behind every fracture is a profound historical wound. This final phase is about identifying the childhood script that dictates 80% of adult human action. The average person operates under the illusion that human beings are rational creatures who make logical choices based on evidence and facts. This is a massive analytical error. Human reactions are overwhelmingly emotional, driven by a deep database compiled during childhood development. An adult does not speak from logic. They speak from their history of pain. When an individual says, "Relationships are completely useless," they only exist to destroy your freedom. They're not stating an objective social fact. They are protecting an unhealed fracture from their past. They construct highly logical arguments to justify what initially broke them. They form their entire worldview based on what traumatized them as a child, then use their adult intellect to build defensive walls around that trauma. This realization changes your entire strategic posture. It shifts your analytical focus from "why are they saying this to me?" to "what historical pain are they terrified of re-experiencing right now?" Instantly, their verbal attacks cease to be threats. They are revealed as basic defense shields. Their complex arguments are no longer offensive weapons. They are desperate armor. And when you see that clearly, you stop emotionally reacting to people. You become entirely unshakable because you realize that no one truly grows up. Most of the world is simply dressing their old childhood wounds in expensive adult suits. Law 11. How an individual handles weakness is their true character metric. If you want to bypass the persona and see the absolute reality of someone's character, do not evaluate them when they're interacting with superiors or equals. Watch them with absolute focus when they are handed a situation involving someone who cannot fight back, a subordinate, a server, or someone showing genuine vulnerability. If an individual reacts to vulnerability with mockery, disgust, or predatory behavior, they're revealing a massive internal terror of their own weaknesses. If they punish mistakes in others with extreme severity, it is a direct indicator that they were never allowed to be human in their formative years. Real strength is structural and manifests as restraint. But the individual who is still internally at war with their own childhood helplessness will constantly attempt to crush weakness around them, to convince themselves they are powerful. Law 12. Attention chasing is an invisible cry of a neglected child. When you encounter an adult whose entire existence is a nonstop demand to be noticed, someone who dominates every room, enters with engineered chaos, and reshapes every narrative around themselves, you are watching an automated childhood loop. At first glance, it mimics high self-esteem, but in the matrix of dark psychology, this hunger for attention is a severe defense mechanism. It is the terror of being completely invisible, of living and dying without validation. The child who is chronically ignored, or whose emotional needs were completely erased, becomes the adult who overcompensates by demanding the spotlight at any cost. They cannot tolerate the quiet, because in the silence, the old feelings of worthlessness return. Attention, to them, isn't vanity, it is psychological oxygen. Law 13. Aggressive criticism is often unspoken envy. One of the most difficult dark truths to accept is that hatred is rarely a product of genuine dislike. It is almost always a distorted form of admiration paired with deep personal resentment. Criticism is infinitely easier than admitting defeat. The individual who viciously tears down a peer's success, mocks someone's uninhibited confidence, or gossips relentlessly about someone else's personal freedom is experiencing severe psychological pain. To witness someone else embody a trait that they themselves abandoned or were forced to suppress is an agonizing reminder of their own limitations. So, instead of doing the internal work to elevate themselves, they attempt to destroy the target to level the playing field. Envy is simply unspoken desire trapped behind a wall of insecurity. If you understand this, you become completely immune to public malice. Law 14. Adults do not enact beliefs, they reenact biography. The masses love to repeat the cliché that people never change, but the technical reality is that people endlessly repeat what they have not processed. They repeat the exact survival roles they were forced to adopt as children, the fears they were conditioned to host, and the toxic relationship dynamics they never escaped. A child who was never heard develops into an adult who completely refuses to listen, because listening feels like a submission to invisibility. An individual who is severely punished for showing natural emotion transforms into a cold, hyperlogical, detached adult who views feelings as a fatal liability. A child who had to perform perfectly to receive parental affection becomes an adult who destroys their health for corporate titles or validation, even when the environment is completely toxic. They believe they're making adult choices based on logic, but they are simply reenacting their childhood biography. Behind the grown professional is always the young child, just trying to secure a safe space. Law 15. Repetitive patterns are a full behavioral confession. This is the final law, and it is the key to absolute psychological clarity. Human beings are incapable of keeping secrets. They don't always know how to articulate what damaged them, but they will act out their trauma continuously through their automated behavioral patterns. The individual who consistently ghosts people the moment an interaction requires real depth. The professional who overworks themselves into physical illness to avoid moments of stillness. Or the character who flirts compulsively but completely sabotages genuine connection. These are not random personality quirks. They are literal confessions. They are shouting their history directly at you. They are showing you exactly how they protect their wounds, where they were broken, and what they are terrified of repeating. If you stop listening to the stories people tell about themselves and start tracking their repetitive behavioral loops, you will hear the truth long before they open their mouth. The internal mirror. Take a deliberate pause and let the noise settle. Every single dark law we have systematically pulled apart over the course of this breakdown was not just an analytical guide to the people around you. It was an explicit diagnostic map of your own psyche. Your personal loops, your hidden overcompensations, your deep-seated fears, and the childhood scripts you are still running. When you step away from this video, the world will look drastically different. The social masks will lose their power to deceive you, and you will see the hidden architecture as clear as day. But remember the warning from the beginning. This level of vision comes with immense psychological weight. You can use these laws as a weapon to manipulate the vulnerabilities of those around you, or you can use them as a shield to ensure you're never fooled by a beautiful lie again. The power is entirely in your hands, but the data never lies.